I think that means we're live. Hello, everyone. Uh, yes. Hello. My name is Andrew Hungerford. I'm the producing artistic director at No Theater Cincinnati. Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this Play Underground Talkback, where we're talking about Radio No's production of A Report of Gunfire by David J. Lohr, starring James Creaky, directed by Zach Robinson. And I have those three people with me right now on your computer screen. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for everyone watching. Hi, everybody. How's it going?
Hi.
Hey, man.
Hello.
We're look at that. Again.
Look at that. We're doing it. We're doing a thing. So for those who have not yet listened to the show, it is about a reporter reporting on the Iraq War in the aughts from Baghdad. And it is one of our heavier subject matters that we've dealt with in Radio No, which tend to be a little funnier on the whole. Not that there's not humor in this, because it's by David Lohr. So, David, I was wondering if you would talk a little bit about what the impetus was for writing this and what the origin, because it was originally written for the stage, of course. Yes,
it was. And I should say, usually I'm much funnier too. Though I do like to throw, a little poignant curveball into even like a funny script. This was sort of the reverse. It's like, oh, let's take a serious thing and have moments that are light, because there are moments that are light in real life. And this was several years ago. One of my regular producing partners, who was living and working in Louisville at the time, tried to start up a 10-minute play festival every year. And we managed to do this for a couple of years. And after a couple of years of marketing it for them, he said, you need to write something for us, because that's your day job, right? The marketing is like, oh, as long as I'm here, I can do this. And it was 2007, I want to say. And so, yeah, this started as a 10-minute monologue. Just literally the first scene that you hear in this is almost exactly that monologue. It was just, I was fascinated with the idea of a journalist trapped behind the lines who happened to be pretty, happened to be, your stereotypical, this is your anchor. And but he feels he's a journalist. He is. And he's there to prove his bona fides. He's there to say, I'm not just the hair, the smile, the voice, right? And does he get in over his head a little bit? He's scared. Everyone who was working there was scared at the time. And it just sort of grew from there. And once it had played as a 10-minute play and got good reaction, we said, this is a thing. Maybe we can do more with it. And we expanded it into a full show for the Capitol Fringe in DC, where it played very differently, because Louisville, Kentucky, it's kind of out away from everything else. In Washington, DC, we're playing a mile from the Pentagon. It was a little weird. And we had people who had been over there coming to every performance. And after every show, at least one or two of them would come up and say, how did you know? And some of it is just, research and reading and, processing it. And some of it was just, this is how I would feel if I were there. And they said, that's what it was like. So it sort of grew and grew and grew. And so it's nice to see it have a life here.
Yeah, excellent. That's really interesting. And of course, speaking of pretty people, James, you were you were then I think a great casting choice, even
the
though
perfect
this is an
transition.
audio version.
The face for you know.
You can feel your face through.
I felt how beautiful he was the whole time.
That's very kind of you to say.
So let's Henry, why don't we listen to the first clip and we can hear a little bit of some of the opening monologue that David was talking about, and James giving voice to the face.
I could have had a good career just telling stories, right? Reporter, anchor, whatever. Seriously, I could have been the hair, the smile, the voice, maybe. But I was a journalist, capital J. I wanted to find the truth. Tulsa, Louisville, Richmond, D.C., the network. Do the overnight show. That's the audition. Step 2, sit in on the morning show. I almost got fired for the look on my face when the lead anchor went on about this charity ball she organized for dislocated pets. But then, the evening news.
Aha, yes, gravitas on the evening news, which I really enjoy. One of the things that's really interesting about this play, and when we were first looking at it and thinking about how it translates to radio now, though it is intended to be, was originally written to be performed live on stage, it lends itself very well to the radio transition, but it does then demand of the performer that they be able to transition between the sort of on-camera voice and then the more confessional voice, which I think is a really interesting thing, because particularly because the radio demands then sort of vocal gymnastics rather than being able to embody it. And I wonder if, James, you had any thoughts to share on that.
Sure. Yeah. As you say, it helps a lot when you have like all the other elements of theater, like other people and lights and cues to sort of indicate what's going on. And Zach was very patient in helping me articulate the differences between when I'm being the guy you see on camera and then when the camera cuts. So you can kind of go, it's always fascinating when we see those little snippets of people like after the camera's off, like journalists or in Jackie Chan movies at the end, where they show all the bloopers. It's fascinating to see that transition from here's the person I'm trying to get you to see, and then it'd be like, oh man, can you believe that thing just happened? So I don't know. That was a really fun line to play with, to sort of to do the commercial version of what is palatable, so that you can try and to feed the medicine of the information, and then the instant like human 3-dimensional commentary on that immediately thereafter is just a fun thing to kind of do to start off each section.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that we, I think, see with reporters, particularly under stressful situations. There's so much pressure to maintain the facade of professionalism and objective reporting, and so to see that break into humanity from time to time, I think, is really interesting.
Yeah, particularly, one of the things that I've always found fascinating by journalism, capital J, is that whole attempt to communicate information dispassionately, with the idea that if you communicate the information dispassionately, the audience can then interpret it and it's more palatable. But that's always such an interesting line to walk, right? Because if you're saying a horrifying thing, but you say it in the same voice that you say a grocery list, you're sort of kind of misusing the communication tools you have with your audience. And so it's totally understandable that an audience might be like, oh, well, everything's fine because you sound fine. But then you also don't want to like make everything titillating and zazzing. And there's this one line you have in the play about how it becomes the news business, that just really kind of speaks to there are sort of like moral and ethical and practical challenges in like trying to get people to be informed, but then also to still keep listening. And yeah, that's nuts. I don't know how people do it.
Zach, as director, what was the most challenging thing for you about approaching a show like this?
Not you, James. You were so easy and wonderful to work with. The thing that we talked about a lot with, and it pretty much in every Radio No show, a lot of Cincinnati actors coming into the process, still have that training of using your face to sell a lot of things. And so one of the things we talk about a lot is, I also edit the shows before sending over to Doug to do the sound design. So I read a lot of the wavelengths, and you can tell a lot from a scene by looking at particular wavelengths. And that's kind of what I have people think about, instead of like selling things with your face and putting the emotion there, finding more ways to put more emphasis around words and emotion. And that's always the most fun challenge of figuring that out, because it's it almost feels like overacting, but for audio, it's oh, it always sounds great. And uh, working with James on this was really just a treat. The the different ways that we would go back through and find levels for things was always so exciting. I would always be getting really hyped up when I would come back on the Zoom screen.
And David, you, of course, while this was written for the stage, you write a lot of audio drama. And I wonder if you have any just perspective of like how this works as audio drama versus things that you write specifically for audio, for like The Incomparable and things like that.
Well, and it's funny. I was sitting here nodding because I also edit a lot of
Right.
stuff for The Incomparable, and I'm going, I know exactly what it is. I can look at the whole multi-track session and be like, I know who is speaking, even if I can't read which track it is or who it is. I remember the arc of the script and go, oh, I know that scene. It's a little creepy to be able to see wavelengths.
It's like in the Matrix, where suddenly
really
you can see all the code.
Yeah, no, it really is. This is one that, because it's a one-man show, and because it's not, even on stage, it doesn't have a lot of action and bouncing and running around, right? One of the things we came up with for making that differentiation between being on camera and talking to the audience was that he was making a video diary, which again, some journalists really did, right? And so he would put his camera down to be, now I am reporting from Abu Ghraib. And then he'd bring the camera back up and he'd use that kind of like, Yorick in Hamlet, right? He's, talking to the skull. And it was a handy tool, because one of the first things I learned about one-man shows or one-person shows is you always have to know who the person is talking to. Even if you never say who it is, you as you write it and you as you act it need to have someone in mind. And so in this, literally it is the camera, and in this version it becomes the microphone. You lose the visual of having that easy transition, but that's what's so good in this production is it's flawless going back and forth. Writing for radio specifically, it's a little bit different, partly because when I do write for The Incomparable, it is for The Incomparable Radio Theater, theincomparable.com/radio. Look it up. And it has a very specific tone, because the idea behind that was to make fake 1940s radio shows with a modern day sensibility, and to tell, even though they're parodies too, they kind of walk that tightrope between parody and pastiche. The idea is, tell good stories that happen to be funny. So some of it is coming up with a terrible pun and figuring out a story that works around the pun. It's silly things like that. But, trying to emulate the form and the format and the style and the tone of specific shows. Yeah. So, if it's a science fiction show, it's going to sound something like this. And if it's a mystery or if it's a Western, writing specifically a play for audio is more of a challenge, because again, you have to think, who is the person talking to? How do you make that clear? How do you make those transitions? This happened to be very easy to translate to it. I do have a couple of other things that I've thought, this would work as audio too. I have a full-length play that I would love to turn into a little podcast series, because there's so much material that you could play with. And yeah, it's a fun challenge to write where you can't rely on motion and vision, and you can. Now, one of the things I love being a sound editor is creating that soundscape in the listener's ears, right? Saying, okay, we like most of our podcasts where it's just conversations are mono, right? And Radio Theater is the only Incomparable podcast that's in stereo, because you create that soundscape, and you have a train that goes from one ear to the other ear, and you have people walking from, one part of a room to another. And so that helps with transitions. But it really is an interesting challenge to think, okay, what is this? Who are they talking to, and why? Why? What's the point of this? Right?
Yeah. And no audiences who are fans of serials might remember David's serials installment, The Fog, from a few seasons ago, which was, again, in this case, a radio play parody adapted for the stage, which involved doing sight gags and things.
And written straight for the stage. I mean, I was writing those week to week going, I have to have something to put up.
That's actually where David and I met for the first time when I was in that. It was a fun time.
I will
not
say,
at all what I expected from the first email.
I will say one of my most terrifying moments on stage would be in the last of those, where we have one of our things is having fake sponsors too, right? So we had an ad, and I'm like, I'm going to remember the song and sing the whole song.
Oh, right.
And and I practiced it all the way up in the car, and and it's a song I wrote, so it's like I know the song, right? And I have the little mini iPad in front of me on my little holder on the mic stand. But I'm gonna look at the audience. By God, I'm not gonna break eye contact, because that's theater, right? And I get to the last two lines of the song, and on the recording, because we did put it out on the podcast stream too. On the recording, you can hear the moment where my brain shuts off for like one note, and the line is gone, and I somehow, without any thinking, I improvised a line that scanned and rhymed, and I finished it. And I think you were standing next to me and looking at the screen going, how did you do that? I don't know. Yeah. Very quiet. Nobody noticed. Audience was like, yeah.
Well, now
they know. They're like, 3 years ago. Damn it.
Well, to distract them, Henry, let's play the second clip from this show.
And then you had a fixer, a driver, an interpreter, hopefully all in one. Even more hopefully, one who didn't mind working around your minder. Basim's all that and more. God, Basim is a happy man. Taller than me, rounder than me, and just happy. Jolly even, at least at first. In public. Around Nivian. I ask him one night, how do you do it? Do what? He asks. He works with journalists. He's used to stupid questions. How is it you can be so happy all the time? He looks around. We were by ourselves, but you could never be sure. And then he smiles. He always smiles. And he says, dear man, if I were not happy, that would mean I would have to pay attention.
So one of the things that's really compelling about this show is that we do establish these other characters who follow the reporter through the course of it. And that, of course, demands additional vocal work on the part of the performer to do dialect work and differentiate character voices. What was this intimidating, James, to like have to do the dialect stuff? Should I not be asking that?
I mean, it's only intimidating if I care and want to do a good job. So, yeah. I mean,
I should say that we have a tendency at the No of throwing James into projects with very limited rehearsal time.
Yeah, that feels like a theme. Yeah. No, I mean, sure. It's fantastic, obviously, to do something that's horribly stressful, and then later you can go like, "Oh, I didn't even die. That's cool." Yeah,
nailed it.
There is a daunting sort of challenge to try to give authenticity to something that like has meat and merit to it, but that is speaking from a place that you don't have firsthand experience from, right? Like, so telling someone else's story, there's always this kind of like fear on my part of like sort of co-opting or speaking for someone. But then if you're literally supposed to speak for someone, then that kind of just gives you permission to be like, all right, well, I'm I'm going to not ridicule it while I'm doing it. And then the fact that I'm trying to do it on purpose for real means it doesn't have to be the way that real person would have done it, because that real person doesn't exist, right? So yeah, I tried to ignore the voice in my head saying like, oh, that's not quite right, because that voice is correct, but that's irrelevant, right? I'm trying to sort of like do something that I'm trying to tell a true thing, even though it may not be literally true, because there is no literal truth to actually get to. And once I kept reminding myself of that, I still beat myself about it constantly, but it worked out okay, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really great, and I also think there's the kind of audio performance storytelling that happens in this show is similar to often what performers have to do in audiobooks, where they have such a wide range of characters to capture in that moment, and while you only have a few characters to capture, there are actually like maybe a dozen, because you fall into different voices at different times where you're quoting people in a way that I think is really effective in this show.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. And yeah, you just have to try not to overthink it. And we did have a sort of a short time frame, but I just sort of trusted Zach to be like, you already did that guy. And I didn't hear that one yet. So I just kind of went with like the first impulse of whatever. And like the text as written really gives you some really great hints as to the kind of character. And so that's just a nice shortcut. Like if it's like short staccato phrases, like Patton, or sort of like that kind of like preceding a line with like, he's looking around, you kind of get that whole, it just gives you a lot of really good shortcut hints as to how something might happen. And if your boss says that's fine, then you did great.
One of the other things that happens in the show, of course, as we've mentioned, again, because it is a show by David Lohr, there is humor sprinkled throughout, which is great in terms of propelling, giving us moments of release from a story that gets increasingly heavy, and it starts in war, and it just gets where things are distressing enough, and as it goes on, you feel the weight of the ongoing occupation in a way that I think is really effective, both textually and in the performance. So Henry, let's give a quick listen to the third clip.
So he leaves. He's driving home, wherever, and he comes up on a new roadblock. Couple of guys with guns and nothing better to do. Who they are, we don't know. They let him through. He keeps going. He's already writing in his head, trying it out loud. He's got this one image he can't let go of. He's been talking about it for days. The sun going down, burning the breadth of horizon to cold black night. He wanted to bring it back to a phoenix rising from ash. There's a type of automatic weapon. It doesn't sound like bang, bang, bang. It's too fast for that. It sounds like paper tearing. He hears gunfire, paper tearing, car horns honking, people shouting, apparently shouting at him. He stops. Maybe he can't go further. Maybe a bullet has hit the car. I don't know.
And a thing that I love about this moment, both in the writing and the performance, is the use of having the aside to describe the information that's going to have an impact in the following moment. I think is just such a really effective way to build suspense. One, because you're telling this story, and then we have to step aside to get this information and then come back to it. And two, it just feels like such an effective emotional form of storytelling for someone who's about to tell a difficult part of the story, and they use the idea of giving background information as a stalling tactic, honestly, to not have to get to the difficult thing. There's not really a question in this. I just wonder if either of you have any thoughts about that.
I was going to say that's exactly right. The idea being, even when he's trying to tell something like that, he still defaults into journalist mode, right? And exactly, it's a delay tactic. It's, I want to remember this beautiful moment about this person, this poetry that he wanted to write, and I don't want to face the fact that very soon he might not exist to finish that poem, right? And as he's telling it, because he's describing an audio recording at this point. Little meta. And he just wants to focus on this and not that, but he has to get to that. And he has to describe that properly because he's a journalist.
Yeah. It's like setting the table, right? Like you can't just take the pile of roast beast and just put it on the table. You kind of have to set up the plates and the cutlery and the napkins and let people know how long it took you to make it, so that they're like, oh, this is delicious and it means something, as opposed to like, oh, I just ate a food and moving on. And you can't give the length and breadth of an entire human person, or the import of an entire relationship that might have been structural and super crucial for your development. You can't give all that, so don't. But if you just give little moments that give you a something of what the other person might mean to you, that it helped it land better for me. Or at least, again, shortcuts. For me, I'm just worried about shortcuts. I'm glad the audience gets to hear it, but I'm just trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do. I'm trying to do my job.
Yeah.
That's what I do as a writer too. It's like,
Yeah.
I knew this character that he's talking about is pretty much in that scene. That's it.
Mhm.
But we have to get the whole sense of this person and this relationship in one scene, you know?
Yeah.
Well,
There's even
you
that-
say it's just one scene, but really we get to spend what feels like, in like context of the story, months with them.
True.
And yeah, that's one of the things I really love about this whole play, is how quickly you can introduce and make the audience care about a character. Because for anybody who's listening right now, and the reason I cut the thing there is because something happens, and so no spoilers. You're gonna have to download the show at notheater.com/merchandise for $5 to figure it out, or join our listeners club. But I right there,
just DM me.
it's
I'll
about to pop up for suspense, and that's like even another shortcut, and one of the things we played with in the rehearsal Zoom room was finding our little beats and shortcuts through that. It was really fun.
Oh yeah.
Not
I mean,
quite fun at that part.
One of the things I love about writing the way I write now, I learned a lot by sound design, doing sound design for stage, and thinking, even in terms of building a slightly complex sound, or something that was supposed to be a transition between scenes while everyone is changing backstage, I would think of the sound itself in storytelling terms, right? What is the rise and fall of this? What is the progression of this? And then I did one show where I got to workshop a script. It was fun. And the script literally starts with about a 30-second long sound effect. And the play then deconstructs that sound to figure out what happened. And it's a homicide investigation. But we get to hear the incident itself and the chaos of it. And the play pulls it apart piece by piece by piece. And again, it was fascinating to see the audience reaction to that. And I realized how you could use sound as a shortcut, how you could use these sound cues and sound effects and put a lot of intensity into them. And then you feel like some of these characters before they even set foot on stage or enter the story. And that's kind of a neat trick. I really enjoy doing that.
Cool. Well, we're at just about half an hour, which is around the time that we usually like to end these things. But I just want to put out there, if there's just for everyone to have one last chance, is there anything in particular that sticks with you for this particular play or this process that is meaningful, or something that's learned to carry forward? Or just opening the floor. Any closing thoughts?
Initially when we were doing this, my punk kid brain was like, why are we talking about the Iraq war again? That's over. Why do we need to talk about this? And just like almost immediately during the rehearsal, it made itself apparent. And it also helped that we started rehearsal in the same day that the Biden administration did some drone strikes for the first time, and it was just like Iraq war may have ended, but the same feelings and sentiments that are felt in this play are still happening. So it's still extremely relevant and a good play to listen to.
I mean, looking back at it, knowing that at that time we were about at the start of this play, we were about 7 years into what has become this forever war that has just grown and expanded, and thinking that here it is 2021 and we're still engaged in war in the region. It's yeah.
Well, and writing it at the time, I want to say the final scene of the play takes place approximately the same week we were doing it in DC. So, and a few years ago, I looked back at it and I thought, does this have a life, right? And I mean, I had intentionally written it the way I did to say, the details may change, and the facts in this are as straight as possible. There are little stories and details that you hear in this that you think, well, that can't possibly be true. They're all true. They may not have happened to a nameless journalist, and this may not have been the name of a real translator, but all the stories in it are true. And I realized that, the feelings are universal. The details change, the locales change, the people change, but the fear, the confusion, the chaos, that's, it's why MASH is set in the Korean War, but it's about the Vietnamese War, right? It's not, war is war, and it pretty much sucks. It's profound.
War is war, and it pretty much sucks. It's a pretty sweet bumper sticker. Yeah,
I believe it was Winston Churchill who first said that.
I think that's true. I think he was the first one who put it on his bumper sticker.
Adam, I may be drunk, but war sucks.
There's definitely, particularly in the context of these sort of forced isolation we've all been enduring in the last millennia, year, 50. There's an interesting, from the experience that I had was very much this idea of there is this Iraq war context that lends very easily to a lot of other contexts of there's this large thing, sort of like the frog in the pot, right? Like there's this thing happening, and there are people saying, here's this awful thing happening, and let me show you why it should change. And I'm not saying how, or I'm not saying who, but I'm saying like, this is obviously unacceptable, right? And there's, as you were, Andrew, talking about or alluding to, like the incremental, like if you said we're going to be in a war for 30 years, people would go like, oh, no way, that's ridiculous. You kind of go in for a few months and some people die, and then everyone's like happy, you signed something. But like the frog in the pot, like the sort of inexorable, inescapable inertia of things as big as war, or as big as, I don't know, let's stick with war. There's very much that feeling that translates from the context specific to this play to the sentiment I'm sure we're all experiencing in our own mutual isolations, to all sorts of giant climate change, challenges that we're navigating now. And so just sort of operating in that kind of emotional energy and having the specificity of stories and relationships that feel familiar in all these different contexts. It was not a hard leap to make to kind of get into those shoes.
Well, for anyone who hasn't yet heard the play, A Report of Gunfire, you can find it at notheater.com/radio-no. It's a piece that, as producer, I'm really proud of. I think it's a really great piece, and I hope that you all, as the creative team, are equally proud of it. And I hope everyone watching this, if they have not yet listened, will go listen right now. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. That's David Lohr, Zach Robinson, James Creaky, Henry Bateman running all the techie tech stuff, and Liz Carmen was stage manager on the show. Is that correct? Yes.
Yes, she was.
So shout out to Liz for doing that. And of course, sound design by Douglas Borntrigger. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us for this talkback for Report of Gunfire. And
we should thank our sponsor for Play Underground in general for this season.
Yeah, that is that's Joe Mock.
Joe Mock and the Real Pro Team.
Joe Mock and the Real Pro Team at Cutler Real Estate. So boom.
You sold me my house.
Yeah, Joe just sold James a house. So there we are. Look at that.
I mean, there's
Works.
method acting, and now there's method sponsorship. This is great.
That's right. Boom. Yeah, thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time at Play Underground. Have a great night.
We'll go back to this for another few months.